Yeah, thank you, Robin. Can everybody hear me? Does this work? Is the audio okay?
Yes, yep. Hear you clearly.
So I want to also thank the organizers of this really lovely and wonderful conference, and also want to thank all of these people. It takes a village to get to the kind of data that I will talk about in a moment. So there's more than I could give credit to, but I do want to give credit to members of Giulio Tononi's lab, in particular Larissa and Andrew, who've given me input. And especially Dr. Nao Tokia from Monash University. Pretty much everything that I talk about today is basically coming from his theoretical work. And last but not least, I want to thank Johannes, since we had great discussions, and he actually inspired me to add a slide to my presentation, which I will show next. This is from his 2020 paper, where he has a section called A New Way of Consciousness Science. And he puts it way better than I could have ever done, that one reason that neuroscientists like me are excited about recent developments and joining this conference is that there is a new paradigm, it seems. And he summarizes this as the central idea being to represent phenomenal consciousness in terms of mathematical spaces, with the ultimate goal to relate them to the physical domain. So what do we mean by that? Well, phenomenal spaces are nothing new to psychology. So right here on the left, I show how we as psychologists think of color. And we believe that all of the colors that humans can see probably can be arranged in a three-dimensional space, such as this. There's very famous work on music and how we perceive tones. The fact that if we double the frequency of a certain tone and therefore hear a higher tone in pitch, but we still make out a relation, which is what we call that it's the same note, the same musical note, basically means that we can arrange all musical notes in a three-dimensional structure, such as a helix. More recent years have shown that even when it comes to more complex objects, such as faces, other objects in our vision, they can be rearranged in this case, multidimensional spaces. And there's good empirical work as well as theoretical work that supports these notions. Why is this exciting? Well, if that is true, and this is a slide that I took from Nao Tokia's work, landing to this idea of Qualia Structuralism. So if we can take musical notes, in this case, there's two chords, and I'm just shifting one note by an octave, but it's still a C major chord, we could mathematically describe that as the shift of this three-dimensional helical structure. Well, the idea is that if we also as neuroscientists get all of the brain data that goes with us having that phenomenal experience, that we could formalize that mathematically as well, and then maybe come up with a way to transform these two mathematical spaces. And so a simple way to do this might be that there's an isomorphism between the neuronal activity in the brain, in this case, changing between these two, these two tones, and then that mathematical description of our perceptual experience. Now, I just showed you that there is a lot of empirical work, theoretical work that shows that we can mathematically formalize our phenomenal experience, but there's a lot more question marks, I would argue, about how we do this for the brain activity, and that is what I would like to talk about today. Now, what I will propose is that a good way in getting, maybe doing that, or maybe the best tool that we have available for doing that for the brain activity data is Giulio Tononi's and Christoph Koch's integrated information theory. And the reason for that is that it's mathematically formalized. So I'm showing here a simplified version of the mathematical formalism of the current version of integrated information theory 3.0. And want to point out that if, as an empiricist, what that means for me, as somebody who's testing theories, that integrated information theory has an advantage over other theories that are trying to make statements about brain activity and its relationship to phenomenal experience, which is that it has mathematical formalism and therefore makes quantitative, not just qualitative predictions. In other words, it's fully rigorous and can be tested in empirical experiments. Now, people are aware that integrated information theory does that. And so typically what people think of is phi, which is a scalar that can be produced by integrated information theory. And the idea is that our consciousness can vary. So if we're anesthetized, we probably don't have a lot of phenomenal experience, whereas if you are awake as you are right now, you have a very rich phenomenal experience. And I'm putting this in this very simple two-dimensional Euclidean diagram because we think that these two dimensions of consciousness, how much content you experience and how aroused you are, awake you are dissociable. And so the argument for that is that there are states, such as the vegetative state, for example, where there's huge changes in your arousal level, in your level of consciousness. So these coma patients, they wake up, they have their eyes open up, they move around, they go to sleep at night, but we do not believe that they have a lot of conscious content. So there is not a lot of experience. But typically, of course, as you can see, there's a correlation between these two. The reason that I'm showing that is that phi is probably largely quantifying levels in consciousness. And that, of course, has led to a lot of empirical research and a lot of attempts at falsifying the theory that so far the theory has held. But my point today is that integrated information theory does more than that. So if we look at the awake state, as you're in right now, where you have a high level of consciousness, there's also this parallel dimension of content. So if I show you a visual illusion, such as this one, you read it very quickly, you'd go, a bird in the bush. And if I tell you, well, take a moment and read it again, you will realize that's actually saying a bird in the bush. So this is a very well-known illusion called repetition blindness. But what I'm getting at is that even though you're at your peak of conscious level, there are differences in the content. So in this case, you had two states of qualia of content in consciousness, one where you just saw a bird in the bush, and then the second one where you saw an extra there, a bird in the bush. And so what integrated information theory does, which I think is underappreciated, is it also gives you a quantitative way to get at this. And the idea is that there's a difference in the cause-effect structure of the underlying physical system. Now, because this has been formalized, it also has been translated into computer code. So Giulio Tononi's lab offers on GitHub a free PyPhi platform, and you can use it to put in neuronal data. And so this is an example from a paper published earlier this year by Nao Tsukiya's lab, where they use neuronal data from a fruit fly, and they're recording many neurons at the same time. And I'm not going to go over this whole diagram. I'm just going to say that at the end, they get two outputs from integrated information theory, using all of this formalism and using this code. This fruit fly was anesthetized or was awake. And as the theory predicts, what you see on the left-hand side is that phi is higher when the fruit fly is awake and not anesthetized, and it is lower when the fruit fly is anesthetized. So up until this point, this is what a lot of you are probably familiar with. Integrated information theory could tell us whether a system has a higher or lower level of consciousness. Well, the more interesting part is that in this study, Tsukiya and I also tried to get at the second part, the cause and effect structure. So for that, there's a different formalism. And in fact, this formalism is available on the Python platform on GitHub in a beta form, but it will be published, I've been told, by Giulio Tononi and his laboratory later this year or early next year. So there will be a new form of integrated information theory. They will probably call it integrated information theory 4.0. And so what 4.0 contains is a new formalism to get at visualizing or computing and visualizing these cause effect structure. And since I'm short on time, I'm just going to give you the gist of it. So this is from an already published paper by Andrew Hahn and Tononi in 2019. And they assume a very simple physical system that you can see here on the left with a couple of nodes, A all the way through H. These nodes, they are interconnected in a linear way, and they also have feedback connections. So if you take that system, that what integrated information theory does, it basically treats the system as a Markov blanket, and it creates a transition probability matrix between all possible states. So it's basically computing something like a Markov chain. And then from that, it applies something that's very reminiscent of Julia Pearl's do calculus to find out whether there are reducible or irreducible cause effects within these straight transitions. Now, the exciting part that has been done in this paper, which will be part of integrated information theory 4, is that you can unfold the cause effect structure of the entire system. And so this is shown right here on the right-hand side. It's a multidimensional structure, of course, with that many nodes. So you're looking at all possible interactions that this system could have. You're testing them for reducibility. So which ones of those you can get rid of and the system remains statistically the same, or which one of those, if you mutilate them, if you just replace them with white noise, is what the technique actually consists of, then the system changes, you know that that's an irreducible connection, and you show it. And so this is just a three-dimensional projection of this multidimensional structure. Now, what my laboratory is doing, is one of the reasons that I'm giving this talk, is that we're part of this also revolutionary development in neuroscience. So what you can see right here is a graph from left to right, where you see the increase of electrodes that we can use to measure neurons at the same time. And you can see that there's a linear increase that has happened over the last decade or so. Well, what's even more exciting is that just a couple of years ago, there's been a break from this linear increase, and there's been a vertical jump to a new technology. And so for researchers, that is available, and it's called Neuropixel probes. Christoph Koch was actually one of the people who's been driving this development. In media, you might have heard about this from Elon Musk and his company Neuralink. So he independently developed a very similar technology, but all of us are celebrating that it's now possible to record 1,000 or even thousands of neurons at the same time. So what does this mean? So to just give you an idea intuitively, so this is an insertion of one of these electrodes into, in this case, a rodent cortex. And you can see right here to the right-hand side, left to right time. And each of these colored dots is the activity of a single neuron. So if you see white, then this neuron is silent. And if you see a dot, the neuron is giving an axon potential. So you can see the binary activity of neurons as a function of time. So you have basically perfect time resolution and perfect time and spatial resolution if you believe that neurons are the unit of the how the brain functions. More than that, you're actually getting two-dimensional profiles of the electric activity of these neurons, and that allows researchers to classify what type of neuron biochemically or morphologically we are recording from. And you can not just insert one of these electrodes at a time. People are inserting 8 or more electrodes at a time in the brain like that. So I've been likening this to fMRI, but at the single cell level, that we can look at the entire brain right now, but we can get it at the resolution of the activity of single neurons, basically in real time. Why is this exciting? Well, there's this theory out there that the brain actually constitutes of smaller computational units, and they're called columns, cortical columns. So the entire brain is made out of these individual units. Each of these units has pretty much the same circuit. So the inputs go right into the middle, basically the meat of the sandwich, if you will. And then the activity gets processed neuronally. It makes its way up into the upper layers of cortex and then down into the lower layers. Any activity that we call feedback in the brain is sparing the middle layer. So there's a clear spatial separation between ascending and descending activity in the brain. Now, the idea that people have had, for example, Henry Markram with the European Brain Project, is that if we can model a single column of the cortex of the brain, let's say in a computer, we're getting a good deal closer to modeling an entire brain, because all we would have to do is scale it up. So one column shown right here on the right-hand side has about 10,000 neurons. If we can model them at real time, a whole brain is basically consisting of a larger number of these columns. So using these electrodes to study columnar activity is promising and exciting for the reason that these columns are thought to be canonical computational units of the brain. So these are the units of the brain for computation. So if we understand the computations that are happening within these units, then we might make a big step forward in understanding the more complex, the complexity of the system. So this right here is actually data from my laboratory. So we're inserting these electrodes, and you can see across a column, I put some of the actual histology here, that you can see these individual neurons. Again, as a reminder, in blue, that's the ascending activity, and in red, descending activity. And to make things simple, I'm just breaking it down into upper, middle, and lower layers. I told you these are the 3 parts of the sandwich bun: the meat and then the bread above and below. And so I'm only taking the activity from these 3 layers, and I'm running this basically through IIT. And so the way that IIT treats a system like that is that it says it has 3 nodes, and then it creates a graph. What I just said before, it takes a present state, and so we would call this the cause because it's in the present. And this could be that all 3 of them are 0. So there's no action potential, there's nothing happening. And then here are all the possible commutations of states that are possible. And then it basically takes this Markovian approach where it says, well, if that's the present state, what's the probability that I end up in the same or different state? And I end up with a 2-dimensional matrix, a transition probability matrix, where I can see in units of probability, if I am in a certain cause, what might be the possible effect that's derived from that. So I'm going to jump over a lot of steps now that IIT does on top of that. In terms of finding causality, because I want to get to the more exciting part, which is the cause-effect structure. So once you have this transition probability matrix, you can now run the new formalism that IIT offers to look at the cause-effect structure. And I'm showing you, in this case, only the first in order cause-effect relations that are possible in the system. But this is basically hot off the presses. But when I ran this earlier this summer, I got quite excited. But because what you can see is that IIT offers is great dimensionality reduction. So out of the individual layers, A, B, and C, only one layer, A, has the causal power by itself. All of the other layers only act synergistically in concert with other layers to exert any causal effect onto the neural system as itself. So to summarize, basically what I wanted to show is that there's exciting development both on the experimental side, methodological side, and we can marry that with these new mathematical, theoretical developments and synergistically create something very powerful, which is looking at neural data exactly in the way that integrated information theory predicts, and maybe eventually get at this bigger question. If we can look at the brain with this kind of resolution and run integrated information theory, can we come up with the cause-effect structure that integrated information theory would predict is isomorphic with the actual phenomenal content of our conscious experience? So with that, I just want to leave you, if you're interested in that I wrote a Google Colab notebook, so you can run the Python code in there yourself. I'm happy to share the code. Of course, the PyPhi toolbox itself is from Larissa Albantakis and other people from Giulio Tononi's lab. With that, again, thanks to everybody who's been part of this project and this conference. Thank you.